A thin frost lay across the concrete dispersal pad at Y7, the familiar code for a field outside Asch in eastern Belgium. The morning light had not yet pushed through the last of the fog, and the sentry's boots made the only certain sound. Somewhere past the line of pine trees, the low grunt of a Daimler truck responded with a dull echo. A crew chief pulled his collar tight, removed his gloves for a moment, and ran a hand along the exhaust shroud of a parked Mustang. The metal was still warm. The pilot had returned scarcely an hour earlier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That pilot, Lieutenant Harold Hall, Mearns of the 357th Fighter Group, still had his parachute resting at his feet. He neither cared nor remembered where he had dropped it. His gloves remained clenched in his hands, and the knuckles beneath were white. He had done something counterintuitive, something any instructor in the United States would have chastised him for. He had pushed into a shallow dive behind a jet streaking for home, and instead of pushing his throttle forward, he had pulled it back. To a ground crewman, the action made no sense. A chase is born of speed. Every American pilot who arrived in England had grown accustomed to the lesson: in pursuit, add power, maintain advantage, close to firing range. Yet Mearns had done the opposite. In his gun camera footage, still developing, one could see the silver shadow of the German jet, the Messerschmitt Me-62, sliding ahead swiftly, confident that its blazing speed would carry it away from danger. What the German pilot had not expected was the Mustang's change of energy state. The white plume of condensation from the jet thickened. The Mustang ceased to overtake in the traditional sense. Instead, it repositioned. Speed, once a lifeline, became the enemy of the Me-62. The jet in its power dive was committed. The Mustang, by trading power for controlled descent and angle, was not. Mearns had fired 4 short bursts, each less than a second. The jet never recovered. It struck the ground at more than 500 miles per hour in a field that only the night before had been quiet farmland. In that pre-dawn haze on the Belgian field, Mearns understood only the violent simplicity of what he had done. He had gone against his earliest training, against years of fighter pilot instinct, and lived. To him, that was reason enough. But to the intelligence section, and soon to headquarters, it represented something larger, perhaps even a doctrinal shift. It had not been instinct alone. In his ready room only days earlier, he had listened to a captain from another squadron discuss the Me-62 problem. He called it that because no one else had a better name. The German jet was not invincible. Its engines were temperamental, its landing, approaches vulnerable, and its endurance limited. But in a dive, during its run against American daylight bombers, it carried speed that outclassed everything the United States Army Air Forces could put in the sky. Mustang pilots found themselves too fast, too slow, too high, or too low, never in the right place to bring guns to bear. The first reactions were predictable. Pilots attempted to outrun the jet, to dive after it with throttles wide open. They believed that the Mustang's exceptional aerodynamic cleanliness, the virtue they had been taught to worship, would solve the problem. But it was precisely this ease of acceleration that betrayed them. The Mustang would overshoot. Overshooting was not a theoretical concern. It was the death of opportunity. In gun camera footage from the autumn of 1944, the Me-62 could be seen streaking ahead of a P-51 diving at full power. Even though the Mustang closed initially, especially if it began higher, its closure rate would rise faster than the pilot could manage within effective firing range. When the pilot yanked back on the stick at high speed, the airplane protested violently. At that moment, the jet would slide out of view, unchanged in purpose, while the Mustang fought the consequences of its own momentum. Many pilots secretly cursed the same quality that others praised, the Mustang's ability to gain speed quickly. Against jets, it became a kind of trap. The intelligence briefs at Leiston, Bodney and Debden had repeated the same message over and over. The Me-62 was most vulnerable during takeoff and landing. This was true. The jet's Jumo engines required careful throttling, Too rapid an input could cause flameout or catastrophic overheating. Yet these windows of vulnerability were confined to airfields protected by the flak belts of the Reich. A pilot might succeed, but only with luck, and the graves of those who took that gamble were proof enough of the odds. So, the question that occupied the men of the 8th Air Force was simple. How does a propeller-driven aircraft remain on the tail of a fast-diving jet fighter long enough to bring guns to bear? The answer, when it arrived in the field, was neither elegant nor rooted in theory. It was practical. Pilots began to throttle back during the chase. To throttle back in a dive went against the grain of everything these men were taught. From primary training in the United States through operational conversion in England, the principle had been clear. Energy is life. More power meant more options, yet the Mi-62 inverted the equation. Too much power meant too much speed. Too much speed meant losing the shot. To reduce power meant keeping guns trained, even as the distance closed more slowly. It meant maintaining position rather than surrendering it. The pilots who first attempted this tactic were not celebrated. Often, their after-action reports were met with skepticism. But their gun camera, the film did not lie. Throttling back controlled closure rate, preserved angle, and allowed the pilot to trade speed for geometry. In the simplest terms, it kept the Mustang where it needed to be, behind the jet. In late autumn of 1944 and into the bitter winter that followed, this technique began circulating informally within the fighter groups. Some shared it only among trusted flightmates. Others included it in their mission debriefs quietly, without emphasis, as though apologizing for breaking rules. The tactic made its first quiet appearances in the 357th, the 4th, and the 352nd fighter groups. By the time the war pushed into the Rhineland, it had become common knowledge, even if seldom written. Mustang pilots did not grow up expecting to fight jets. Few of them had any reason to imagine that such machines would appear in numbers. The Mi-62 had been rumored. Intelligence officers spoke of it in measured tones, careful not to ignite panic or hope. When it finally entered combat in the late summer of 1944, it did so against the bombers of the 8th Air Force. The jet existed to destroy American heavy bombers. Escort fighters were considered a secondary concern. The Reich hoped to drive the daylight offensive from the sky. No single weapon could have reversed the course of the war, but high-speed, cannon-armed fighters that could slash through bomber formations without a conventional turning engagement represented a real threat. To some, the jet's appearance felt inevitable, the natural progression of warfare. To others, it felt unnatural, as though the machine had arrived from some future that none of them had consented to enter. Mustang pilots, whose aircraft represented perhaps the most refined piston-engine fighter ever produced, now found themselves chasing machines beyond piston logic. The conditions under which these pilots flew were continuous reminders of the common human cost of adaptation. On bitter mornings, ground crews labored with numb hands. Fuel trucks moved carefully over difficult surfaces, knowing that a single misstep could halt an entire mission. Men loaded ammunition without speaking, their breath suspended in the air like pale smoke. Pilots walked slowly to their aircraft, maps tucked into their jackets, faces covered with scarves, eyes weary. Despite the Mustang's beauty, it remained only a tool. The war did not care for beauty. The belief held throughout 1943 and most of 1944 was that the Allied air campaign represented complete dominance over the Reich. There were reasons to believe this. From the factories at Inglewood and Dallas came more Mustangs than Germany could ever hope to match with jets. American production was an engine without pause. The Mustang replaced the P-47 Thunderbolt in many escort roles. Its extended range, courtesy of wing tanks and external drop tanks, allowed it to fight deep over German airspace. With Mustangs present, bombers reached their targets with fewer losses. But the arrival of the Mi-62 challenged confidence, not because it was invulnerable. It was not. Not because it was unstoppable. It was not. But because it was new. Because it could dictate the terms of engagement through speed alone. In an age when men spoke of courage and training, Here came a machine whose primary advantage lay in physics. The 8th Air Force gradually realized that success against the Mi-62 would not be achieved through power alone. It required anticipation, positioning, and a willingness to unlearn habits that had once been the foundation of survival. The story of Mustang pilots pulling throttle in dives begins here, in this liminal space between doctrine and necessity. It did not originate in flight schools or tactical memoranda. It came instead from the crucible of combat, from pilots who had survived first contact with jets and understood that survival demanded something unfamiliar. They found that restraint could be a weapon. They found that in surrendering excess speed, they gained control. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Men like Mearns did not speak of these things in theoretical terms. In mission debriefs, they spoke plainly. One pilot from the 357th recalled, "In the winter of 1944, you do not chase him with everything. You chase him just enough." Another from the 4th Fighter Group summarized it more simply. "If you want to keep him, you must slow down." There were German pilots who later confirmed the disruption this caused. They described Mustangs that no longer lunged past them in predictable fashion. Instead, they remained anchored behind, as though tethered. The Mi-62 retained speed advantage, but not angle. To brake, and that tether required maneuvers the jet was poorly suited for, especially at low altitude, where its engines were vulnerable to throttle changes and where flak and terrain both conspired against recklessness. Mustang pilots found their opening during the jet's firing runs. The Mi-62 would dive from altitude, attack the bomber box, and exit beneath or ahead of the formation. Traditional instinct encouraged the Mustang pilot to dive after it immediately with full power. Those who throttled back during that initial descent, however, preserved firing geometry. The jet would continue accelerating, but the Mustang's controlled descent allowed a stable platform for guns. In several confirmed encounters, this restraint provided the difference between a fruitless chase and a successful kill. To understand why this mattered, one must remember the doctrine that shaped these pilots. Every young man arriving in England had been taught that the airplane's engine was his lifeline. In primary training in Texas, Arizona, or California, instructors told them to keep power on in every dangerous situation. When chased, dive with power. When attacking, dive with power. When uncertain, add power. The throttle was the instinctive answer. It was not merely a lever, it was security. Yet against jets, the throttle became a question. What does one do when the natural instinct to accelerate becomes a liability, when too much speed sends the airplane beyond its ability to maneuver? The Mi-62 taught Mustang pilots to think differently about energy. It taught them that power was not simply gained, it could be managed, traded, or withheld. These lessons were not born in lecture halls or test facilities. They emerged from tired men who climbed into their aircraft before sunrise, glanced at their wingmen, and trusted that by nightfall at least some of them would return. They emerged from the cold briefings in which intelligence officers pointed at maps of airfields at Acme, Rhine, and Brandenburg, explaining how jets might behave. They emerged from the simple, quiet acknowledgement that instinct might no longer be enough. Night pushed slowly into dawn outside Asch. Mearns walked alone toward the operations hut, the crew chief behind him carrying the discarded parachute. The ground was hard beneath his boots. His breath rose and vanished. He had shot down a jet, but the dawn did not care. Nothing about his posture suggested triumph. He carried only the knowledge that he had done something unfamiliar, and that it had worked. Inside the hut, a pot of weak coffee sat on a table. Maps pinned to the walls fluttered gently whenever the door opened. On one wall, a list of missing men. On another, the schedule for the day's sorties. A clerk looked up and nodded. Mearns answered without words. His debrief would begin soon. He would describe his dive, his throttle position, his angle, his firing range. He would do so without embellishment. The man taking notes would write quickly. Outside, the fog continued to lift. More Mustangs would soon roll to the runway. The war continued without pause. Mearns sat on a bench, still in his flight suit. The warmth of the room reached him slowly. In the corner, another pilot washed his hands in a basin, the water stained with oil. A silence held between them, the kind that only comes from shared experience. Mearns looked at the other man, nodded once, and said quietly, "It works." The other pilot nodded. He had heard rumours. Now, here was flesh-bound proof. Dawn slipped across the airfield like a thin veil of silver light. The noise of engines warming rumbled against the ground, promising another journey into the troubled sky. Pilots moved with methodical precision, knowing that each flight balanced on the edge of chance. After the last mission's chaotic dance with the Me-262, every Mustang crew felt the weight of the enemy's speed, yet carried quiet confidence gleaned from experience. The horizon stretched with the memory of contrails slashed like white scars across the heavens, announcing that yesterday's survival demanded renewed resolve today. The briefing room smelled of chalk dust and black coffee. Maps lay pinned beneath metal rulers, red arrows curving across Germany like serpents. The mission objective was a factory complex hidden beneath smoke and deception. Intelligence suggested the Luftwaffe would commit more jets to intercept. Veteran pilots exchanged glances. They understood that the Me-262 was not invincible, but it demanded patience. The throttled dive trick, whispered between squadrons, carried an almost mythical quality. It required nerves of stone and timing that flirted with disaster. Yet, it offered a path to claim victory against a machine that seemed to outrun reality itself. Lieutenant Harlow remembered his first encounter clearly. He had watched a jet blaze past like a comet, only to overshoot its target. Harlow had eased his throttle, dropped beneath the enemy's flight path, and waited. Gravity and geometry aligned like old friends. When the 262 climbed sharply, he followed with a steady hand, placing careful bursts until smoke poured from the jet's tail. It was a moment that changed him. Now, as he traced his finger along the mission map, he felt a familiar calm settling into his bones. Mechanics worked feverishly on the Mustangs. Oil-blackened hands turned wrenches with quiet reverence. Each plane carried names painted on polished panels: Wild Dove, Silver Echo, Golden Riddle. These names held stories, jokes, promises. They were more than machines. They were companions, whose wings had sheltered men from the razor edges of the sky. Crew chiefs tested the propellers, scrutinizing every sound. They knew that a single malfunction could mean the difference between returning with honor or vanishing into cold clouds. As the squadron taxied into position, sunlight flashed against aluminum skin. The distant ground, the crew raised their hands in solemn salute. Engines roared to life, trembling through the pilot's boots. Wheels lifted, and the world below shrank into a grid of fields and towns. The sky opened, drawing them upward with magnetic force. Every pilot carried personal rituals: a tap on the gauge, a whispered prayer, a fleeting memory of home. They rose as one, a flock of silver birds crossing the threshold where fear and faith intertwined. Clouds gathered like fortresses. Harlow led the formation, scanning the horizon for the telltale streak of jet flame. He spoke calmly over the radio, guiding his men through shifting layers of wind. The bomber group they escorted flew beneath them, a moving mountain of determination. Each B-17 carried bombs destined to cripple the hidden factory, but the Mustangs knew the Luftwaffe would do everything to stop them. Minutes passed with tense quiet. Then, like ghosts, the Me-262 seconds emerged. Their approach was sudden, streaks of steel slicing through the sun. The first pass was swift. Jets fired long bursts at the bombers, then climbed away with impossible acceleration. Mustang pilots tightened their grips. The moment to strike was near. Harlow called out, his voice steady. He signaled a throttled descent, guiding half the squadron into controlled dives. The The sky bent around them as they surrendered speed, positioning beneath the enemy's climb. The trick was a paradox. To fight the fastest plane, they first had to go slower. Jets overshot again, unable to turn sharply. Harlow's sight locked onto one jet that flared too wide. He fired. Tracers stitched the metal, and the jet burst into flame, spiraling downward. Around him, others followed suit. The sky became a gallery of moving decisions. Pilots read the dance, jets diving, Mustangs waiting, gravity-shifting allies. Radio chatter filled with terse commands and confirmations. One Mustang took damage but remained aloft, limping toward friendly territory. The bombers pressed forward, determined to release their payloads. The enemy shifted tactics. A group of jets formed a pincer move, trying to trap the Mustangs. Harlow responded, climbing into thin air where engines strained. Frost rimed his canopy, his breath fogged. Below, the jets thought they had control. Harlow dove again, using altitude to build the perfect angle. His squadron mirrored the maneuver. Together, they broke the pincer, sending jets scattering like startled birds. Bomb doors opened. Explosions blossomed below, sending shockwaves through the sky. Smoke rose while the Mustangs kept the enemy at bay. Yet victory was not without cost. One jet tore through the formation and struck a bomber's wing. The great machine dipped, then steadied as its crew fought to regain control. Harlow felt a knot of dread, but the bomber recovered long enough to release its bombs. The crew bailed moments before the aircraft succumbed to fire. The battle waned as fuel ran low. Jets faded into the distance, uninterested, in prolonged engagement. Mustangs gathered, battered but unbroken. They turned toward home, engines humming like exhausted choirs. Harlow glanced at the empty spot where one wingman should have been. Silence weighed heavily. As they landed, ground crew rushed forward. Medics attended the wounded. Pilots removed helmets with trembling hands. Harlow walked alone for a moment, thinking of the pilot who did not return. Grief wrapped around him like a cloak. He touched Silver Echo's nose, whispering thanks for another safe passage. Later, in the mess hall, stories circulated. Each tale added fragments to the day's legacy. Pilots spoke of narrow escapes, perfect shots, near disasters. The commander praised their courage but reminded them that tomorrow might be harsher. The war was far from over. Night settled, stars sharp against the black. Harlow sat outside, writing a letter. He described the sky, the danger, the strange beauty found in controlled chaos. He tried to explain how slowing down could defeat speed, how patience could master fury. He sealed the letter, hoping it would find its way home. Days passed. Missions continued. Factories crumbled under relentless bombardment. The Me-262 appeared less frequently, a fading threat, but every pilot remained watchful. The sky had taught them that even fading enemies could return with new ferocity. Spring arrived. Fields below blossomed, yet the air war raged. On one mission, Harlow flew with a new pilot, eager but inexperienced. The young man listened closely to Harlow's advice. Trust your instincts, respect the wind, never chase blindly. When jets approached, the new pilot hesitated. Harlow guided him through the dive, teaching by example. Together, they turned the tables on a jet that seemed untouchable. Their return was celebrated quietly. Harlow knew each success brought them closer to the war's end. The young pilot thanked him, eyes bright with gratitude. The factory complex, once formidable, now lay in ruins. Smoke curled into the sky like surrendered prayers. Harlow stood by his Mustang, pondering what came next. The lessons learned in the air would endure long beyond the conflict. They would shape future pilots who might never know the terror of a jet's scream or the calm required to defeat it. Dawn slipped across the airfield like a thin veil of silver light. The noise of engines warming rumbled against the ground, promising another journey into a troubled sky. Pilots moved with methodical precision, knowing that each flight balanced on the edge of chance. After the last mission's chaotic dance with the Me-262, every Mustang crew felt the weight of the enemy's power, yet carried quiet confidence refined amid fear. The horizon stretched with memories of contrails slashed like white scars across the heavens, reminding them that yesterday's survival demanded renewed resolve today. Harlow leaned against Silver Echo's wing, gathering strength. The briefing room smelled of chalk dust and black coffee. Maps lay pinned beneath metal rulers, red arrows curling across Germany like serpents. The mission objective was a factory complex, hidden beneath smoke and deception. Intelligence suggested that the Luftwaffe would commit more jets to intercept. Veteran pilots exchanged glances. They understood that the Me-262 was not invincible, but it demanded patience. The throttled dive trick whispered between squadrons carried an almost mythical quality. It required nerves of stone and timing that flirted with disaster. Yet, it offered a path to claim victory against a machine that seemed to outrun reality. Lieutenant Harlow remembered his first encounter clearly. He had watched a jet blaze past like a comet, only to overshoot its target. Harlow had eased his throttle, dropped beneath the enemy's flight path, and waited. Gravity and geometry aligned like old friends. When the jet climbed sharply, he followed with a steady hand, placing careful bursts until smoke poured from the tail. It was a moment that changed him. Now, he traced his finger along the mission map, feeling calm settle. Mechanics worked feverishly on the Mustangs. Oil-blackened hands turned wrenches with tired faith. Each plane carried names painted on polished panels: Wild Dove, Silver Echo, Golden Riddle. These names held stories, jokes, promises. They were more than machines. They were trusted companions. Crew chiefs tested propellers, scrutinizing every sound. They knew that a single malfunction could mean the difference between returning with honor or drifting into cold clouds. Sparks danced as metal kissed metal, anchoring hope beneath sunrise. The squadron taxied into position, sunlight flashing against aluminum skin. Ground crews raised their hands in solemn salute. Engines roared to life, trembling through pilots' boots. Wheels lifted, and the world below shrank into a quilt of fields and towns. The sky welcomed them, drawing them upward. Every pilot carried personal rituals: a tap on the gauge, a whispered prayer, a fleeting memory of home. They rose as one, silver birds crossing the threshold where fear and faith intertwined. Clouds gathered like fortresses. Harlow led the formation, scanning the horizon for the telltale streak of jet flame. The bomber group they escorted flew beneath them, a moving mountain built on courage. Each B-17 carried bombs destined to cripple the hidden factory. The Mustangs knew the Luftwaffe would do everything to stop them. Above, sunlight gleamed on wings. Minutes passed. Then, the Me-262 seconds emerged like ghosts, steel streaks slicing sunlight. The first pass was swift. Jets fired long bursts at the bombers, then climbed away. Mustang pilots tightened their grips. The moment to strike was near. Harlow signaled a throttled descent, guiding half the squadron into controlled dives. The sky bent as they surrendered speed, slipping beneath the enemy's climb. The trick was a paradox. To fight the fastest plane, first go slower. A jet overshot, flaring too wide. Harlow fired. Tracers stitched metal. The jet burst into flame, spiraling down. Another jet attempted escape, chased by Silver Echo's wingman. Chaos echoed across the sky. Pilots weighed seconds, reading angles. A damaged Mustang limped, still fighting. The bombers pressed forward. A group of jets formed a pincer move, hoping to trap the Mustangs. Harlow responded, climbing into thin air. Frost rimed his canopy, his breath fogged. Below, jets played their hand. Harlow dove, using altitude for the perfect angle. His squadron mirrored. They broke the pincer, sending jets scattering. Bomb doors opened, explosions blossomed, shock waves trembled. Smoke rose as Mustangs kept enemies at bay. One jet tore through formation, striking a bomber. The machine dipped, then steadied. Harlow felt dread. The bomber recovered long enough to release bombs. The crew bailed before the aircraft fell into haze. The battle waned as fuel ran low. Jets faded into the distance. unwilling to linger in turning fights where their advantage slipped away. The Mustangs gathered, battered but unbroken, adjusting formation as they pointed toward home. Their engines hummed like weary choirs, voices frayed but still steady. Harlow glanced at the empty spot where his wingman should have been. Silence weighed on him more heavily than any enemy fire. Loss, though familiar, never dulled. As they landed, ground crews rushed forward. Medics tended to the wounded. Mechanics ran hands across battered wings, speaking softly to machines as if they could soothe them. Pilots removed helmets with trembling fingers, sweat streaking their faces. Harlow walked alone for a moment, thinking of the pilot who had not returned. Grief wrapped around him like a cloak, heavy yet invisible, impossible to shrug off. He touched Silver Echo's nose, whispering thanks for another safe passage. Inside the mess hall, stories passed between men like currency, tales of narrow escapes, perfect shots, and near disasters echoed beneath the low ceiling. Some pilots laughed, voices stretched thin. Others sat quietly, nursing coffee like medicine. The commander praised their courage, reminding them that tomorrow might be harsher. The war was far from over. Night settled, stars sharp against the blackness. Harlow sat outside, writing a letter. He told of the sky, of danger, of the strange beauty in controlled chaos. He tried to explain how slowing down could defeat speed, how patience could master fury. He sealed the letter, hoping it would find its way home and bring comfort to a mother who prayed beyond oceans. Days passed. Missions continued. Factory after factory crumbled beneath waves of bombs. The Me-262 appeared less frequently now, its threat fading like a storm losing strength. But every pilot remained watchful. The sky had taught them that even fading enemies could return with new ferocity. Harlow carried that truth like a scar, invisible yet felt. Spring arrived. Fields below blossomed green. Villages stirred awake beneath sunlit roofs. But above, the air war raged. On one mission, Harlow flew with a new pilot, Stevens, eager but uncertain. The young man listened closely to Harlow's advice. Trust your instincts, respect the wind, never chase blindly. When jets approached, Stevens hesitated. Harlow guided him through the throttled dive, teaching by example. Together, they turned the tables on a jet that seemed untouchable. Stevens landed shaken but alive. Their return was celebrated quietly. He thanked Harlow with wide, grateful eyes. Though success warmed the heart, Harlow felt a strange pull growing stronger each day. He walked the airfield at dusk, boots whispering against gravel. He watched new pilots train, saw in them reflections of his younger self, fear tempered by resolve. He wondered how many would still stand when peace finally came. Weeks of missions continued to erode the hidden factory complex. What had once been formidable now lay in ruins, shrouded in smoke that curled into the sky like surrendered prayers. Engineers confirmed that output had dropped drastically. The enemy's lifeline was severed. Still, orders demanded they press on, ensure no ember remained to reignite the Luftwaffe's strength. Harlow stood beside Silver Echo, fingers tracing her metal skin. He felt each rivet, each scar from battle. She had carried him through fire more times than he could remember. Her wings bore the proof, patched aluminum, faded paint, oil-streaked panels. She was older now, worn but unbroken, just like him. One evening, he met Stevens near the hangar. The young pilot's face was shadowed, eyes stormy with questions. "Sir," Stevens asked, "how do you keep going? After everything?" Harlow paused before answering. Not because he didn't know, but because the truth was fragile. "You keep going because someone has to," he said softly. "If you stop, someone else carries the weight you've set down. We're all tired, but every mission brings us closer to the end. And every day we survive, we give someone at home another sunrise." Stevens nodded, though the weight in his eyes remained. War aged souls faster than years. The next morning, the squadron assembled again. A fresh mission, escort bombers deeper into enemy territory. Rumour whispered of new jets, machines meant to exceed the 262. Harlow doubted it. The enemy was running out of time. Fuel, pilots, machines. Below, the land carried scars of fire-blackened forests, broken rail lines, craters stitched like crude wounds. The Mustangs flew steady, a silver thread woven above battered earth. Midway to target, radio static crackled. Faint calls, strained with fear. Another group was under attack. Harlow's squadron altered course, diving into a sky trembling with gunfire. Smoke trails cut across clouds, marking where bombers struggled. Harlow ordered 2 flights to protect the main formation, while he led the others toward the embattled group. They arrived to find chaos. Several B-24 seconds limped beneath them, trailing smoke. Enemy jets streaked past, guns blazing. Harlow didn't think he acted. He dove, throttle cut, dropping beneath the jets. Silver Echo responded with grace, wings slicing air cleanly. One jet looped upward, too fast to turn. Harlow climbed behind it, pulling lead until his sight met steel. He fired. Sparks burst across the fuselage. The jet shuddered, then vanished in flame. Stevens followed, heart pounding. He lined up his shot carefully, recalling Harlow's words. Never chase blindly. His bullets struck an engine. The jet faltered, spiraling down. Stevens exhaled sharply, adrenaline thrumming. The battle glittered with fire and fear. Mustangs wove between bombers, intercepting threats. Harlow moved like a whisper through storm, reading angles with instinct. He, a trusted Silver Echo, felt her heartbeat in the engine's rhythm. Together they became something more than pilot and machine, fearless, fluid, unbroken. The winter skies over the shattered villages of the Ardennes seemed colder than memory itself. Captain Nathan Hale, once the quiet Kansas farm boy who barely spoke above a murmur, now moved like a silent thread of purpose through the deep forests. The enemy offensive had shocked the Allied lines, punching deep into what everyone assumed was secured ground. Nathan, a pathfinder with the 82nd, found himself leading an improvised company of stragglers, mechanics with rifles, cooks who had not fired a shot since basic, and a few veterans from scattered units. They followed him because he walked as if the world depended on every footstep, and perhaps it did. He marched wordlessly, scanning the tree line. The Luftwaffe, once kings of the air, had grown scarce, but their fighter bombers still appeared like ghosts, hunting roads and columns. The company halted near a sunken lane where artillery craters overlapped. Corporal Ruiz, his breath visible in frantic bursts, pointed toward a distant glow flickering through the pines. They moved closer, weapons raised. The glow came from a barn, an unplanned refuge. Inside, a handful of paratroopers sat around a small stove, their faces pale, their eyes hollow from sleepless nights. They recognized Nathan at once. His name travelled among the airborne, spoken with respect. Nathan's lieutenant, Walsh, studied a tattered field report taped to the wall. The German armoured spearhead was pushing toward Bastogne, trying to split the Allied front. If successful, they would seize critical fuel depots, prolonging the war. Walsh rubbed his eyes. He assigned Nathan and Ruiz to scout the ridge before dawn. The rest would fortify the barn and regroup. The men slept in shifts. Nathan lay awake, listening to distant engines rumbling like thunder. His mind turned to memories of his father, who had spoken of storms on the prairie, how their whispers foretold ruin or renewal. Nathan wondered which this war would bring. When dawn came, it was cruel and bright. The snow blinded them as they crawled up the ridge. From the crest, Nathan saw armoured silhouettes moving along the frozen road, panthers, their engines coughing in the bitter wind. Infantry marched beside them, hunched figures in grey. Nathan counted at least a battalion, Worse, he saw Nebelwerfer rocket crews setting up, trailing cables like roots in the snow. He signaled Ruiz to fall back, but as they crawled, a German patrol emerged from the pines. The firefight was sudden. Nathan dropped 2 soldiers before Ruiz's rifle jammed. Nathan lunged forward, tackling the last soldier. Snow flew. He pinned the man, silencing him. They withdrew fast, hearts throbbing with fear. Back at the barn, Nathan delivered the grim report. Walsh's face tightened. They needed to warn command, but their radio remained dead. The paratroopers prepared to withdraw toward friendly lines. As they exited the barn, artillery shrieked overhead. Shells slammed into the earth, hurling snow and wood. Nathan was thrown against a fence. When he stood, the barn roof had collapsed. Flames licked the beams. Men crawled from the wreckage, their uniforms burning. Walsh, bleeding heavily, ordered Nathan to take command and lead survivors toward Bastogne. Nathan hesitated, then nodded. The lieutenant pressed his dog tags into Nathan's palm, whispering something lost to the roar of the fire. They marched through forests, avoiding roads where tanks prowled. Snow soaked their boots, numbing feet until every step was agony. Along a ravine, they found a wrecked convoy of American trucks, their supplies scattered. Among the debris lay medical kits, blankets, and a single functional jeep. Nathan assigned 2 wounded men to drive while others pushed. The engines sputtered but caught. They loaded ammunition and rations. The jeep moved, with painful slowness, but it was movement. Near dusk, they stumbled upon a group of Belgian civilians hiding in a farmhouse cellar. A young woman named Elise, her face streaked with soot, pleaded for help. German troops had taken her brother, forcing him to guide them through the woods. Nathan promised he would try to find him, though his heart tightened with doubt. The civilians shared bread and thin soup, then guided Nathan's group to a stream bed that led west. Night fell. They travelled by starlight, every branch seeming to reach for them. At midnight, they heard voices and saw lanterns. Nathan signalled halt. Through his binoculars, he saw a German checkpoint with 6 soldiers, their rifles slung casually. Beyond lay the road to Bastogne. Nathan planned quickly. Ruiz and 3 others would flank left. Nathan and 2 sergeants would attack from the front. They moved silently, stepping between shadows. Nathan waited for a passing cloud to darken the moon, then fired. The checkpoint erupted. Ruiz's group hit from the flank, dropping 3 soldiers. The last 2 surrendered. Nathan secured maps and papers. Ruiz lit a cigarette with shaking hands, whispering a prayer. They regrouped, dragging bodies aside. The road was open. They drove the jeep, headlights off, pushing through drifts. The trees parted, revealing Bastogne's outskirts. Fires burned in distant streets. They passed lines of foxholes filled with shivering men from the 101st Airborne. A major approached, demanding a report. Nathan described the armoured movement and Nebelwerfer positions. The major ushered him into a command post, a cellar lit by lanterns. Maps covered the walls. Officers argued over depleted ammunition and broken lines. Nathan offered details, sketching roads and ridges. The officers listened, their expressions grim. Nathan and his men were assigned to a battered rifle company on the northern perimeter. They dug in, strengthening foxholes with logs and frozen earth. Snow fell again, soft and merciless. The enemy attacked at dawn. Artillery roared, then infantry surged across the white hell. Nathan fired until his rifle clicked empty, then grabbed a fallen soldier's weapon. Bullets snapped overhead. Men screamed. Tanks approached, their shells tearing trenches apart. Nathan signalled a bazooka team. They crawled forward, fired, and crippled a panther. Flames burst from the turret. The Nebelwerfers began their haunting chorus, rockets streaking overhead. The ground shook. Nathan's ears rang. He saw Ruiz fall, clutching his leg. Nathan dragged him to cover, applying a tourniquet. Ruiz grinned weakly. "Kansas farm boy, huh?" Nathan nodded, but his smile was brief. He returned to the line, firing, shouting orders. Hours passed, the battle ebbing and flowing. Finally, the Germans withdrew. The field was littered with bodies, burned tanks, and twisted wire. Nathan collapsed in the snow, breath steaming. That night, he walked among the wounded in the cellar hospital. A medic offered him coffee. Nathan sat beside Ruiz, who slept fitfully. The medic spoke of hope. Patton's Third Army was racing north. Nathan found solace in that thought. Yet he also feared the toll. Outside, the wind howled like a mourning voice. He stepped into the night, looking toward the dark tree line. Somewhere, Elise's brother might still be alive, guiding the enemy or lying forgotten in the snow. Nathan vowed to find him when the chance came. Days blurred, the siege tightened, food dwindled, ammunition was rationed. Men wrapped newspapers beneath their coats, shivering. On Christmas morning, Nathan received a tin of chocolate from a Belgian child. He shared it with his squad. The sweetness brought brief smiles. At noon, the enemy attacked again, but their strength seemed weaker. Nathan sensed change. That afternoon, distant artillery thundered from the south. Patton had arrived. Cheers echoed along the lines. As tanks rolled into Bastogne, Nathan stood, beside Ruiz, who now leaned on a crutch. The battle for the Ardennes was far from over, but relief surged like warmth through frozen veins. Nathan felt the heavy weight of his promise to Elise. He gathered a small patrol and headed east, determined to search the woods for her brother. The snow muffled their steps, and the forest waited, holding its secrets beneath the white hush. They moved quietly, mindful of lingering enemy patrols. At a crossroads marked by shattered trees, they found signs of recent struggle. Footprints, spent cartridges, and a scarf tangled around a branch. Elise's brother must have passed here. Nathan pressed onward. Soon they heard voices ahead. He signalled his squad to disperse. Crawling forward, he saw a German squad guarding 2 prisoners. One resembled Elise. Nathan studied the ground. Snow lay untouched behind the Germans. Surprise was possible. Nathan whispered his plan. 2 men would create a distraction by tossing stones, drawing attention. When the Germans shifted, Nathan and Ruiz would strike. The plan unfolded quickly. The stones clattered. The Germans turned. Nathan fired, dropping one. Ruiz, despite his wound, hit another. The squad rushed in. The firefight was brief, harsh. When it ended, the prisoners huddled together. Elise's brother, pale and thin, stared in disbelief. He embraced Nathan, murmuring thanks. The second prisoner, an elderly man, wept with relief. They led the freed men toward Bastogne. Along the way, Elise's brother described how he'd misled German troops, guiding them in circles. His defiance had saved villages. Nathan admired his courage. At dawn, they reached friendly lines. Elise ran from the cellar, tears glistening. Her brother stumbled into her arms. Nathan felt a warmth deeper than any fire. The war still raged, but this reunion felt like victory. Nathan's unit received orders to pursue retreating forces. Snow churned under boots and treads as they advanced. The forests that once seemed endless now revealed hidden wrecks, burned trucks, discarded helmets. They crossed frozen streams, wary of ice giving way. The sky cleared, revealing sunlight that glittered on the snow, deceptive in its beauty. Nathan thought of home, picturing wheat fields beneath a summer sun. Near a village they encountered fierce resistance. German paratroopers, holding the high ground, ambushed them. Bullets rained from stone houses. Nathan crawled along a low wall, signalling flanking fire. A squad launched smoke grenades, obscuring the enemy. They stormed forward, clearing houses room by room. The fighting was close, brutal. Nathan wrestled with a soldier on a stairwell, finally gaining the upper hand. When the smoke cleared, the village was theirs. Inside the church, they found wounded civilians and a lone priest who offered blessings to friend and foe alike. Nathan felt the weight of loss. Each step forward seemed to demand a piece of his soul, but he also sensed that the enemy was faltering. Rumours spread that Hitler's gamble had failed. The offensive was collapsing. In late January, Nathan received leave to rest in a rear area. He slept for 12 hours, dreamed of home, then awoke to a quiet morning. Ruiz, now recovering, challenged him to a game of cards. Laughter returned, tentative but real. Letters arrived. Nathan received one from his mother, who wrote of neighbors helping with the farm and praying for his safe return. He read it twice, then tucked it in his pocket. Yet rest was brief. New orders came, sending them to cross the Rhine. Nathan felt the familiar weight settle on his shoulders. He wondered how many more roads lay ahead. But for now, he walked with purpose, knowing that every step carried him closer to an uncertain peace. The world had changed, and he with it. The horizon shimmered, promising both danger and hope, as winter slowly loosened its grip. Yet Nathan knew the journey continued, testing courage, faith, and the bonds of comrades. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.